This is a crusade. This is a holy war against the deep state.
Where are the dictators? Where are the strong men?
Donald Trump is our instrument for retribution.
I'm going to fight for Christians. I'm going to fight for white people.
They have the Great Reset. We have the Great Awakening.
And why shouldn't I root for Russia? Because I am.
I want to see these people go through misery because of their grooming against our children.
After the assailant entered the home asking, "Where's Nancy? Where's Nancy?" Those are the very same words used by the mob when they stormed the United States Capitol.
I did nothing wrong.
Welcome to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast, where we cut through the noise and help you make sense of the chaotic information space around us. I'm Griff Somke.
And I'm Jay McKenzie.
Chris Mathias is a journalist who covers the far right for the Huffington Post. His work has covered the cutting edge of white nationalism and the MAGA movement. He's currently working on a new book entitled To Catch a Fascist, about the anti-fascist movement and the research that goes into exposing the fascists that walk among us. We're thrilled to have him with us today. Chris, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to Did Nothing Wrong.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we really appreciate you. So tell us a little bit about your background, how you found yourself covering the radical right.
Yeah, for sure. So I've been a reporter at HuffPost for a very long time, for like over 10 years. And, back in 2016, I was focusing almost solely on Islamophobia and also criminal justice stuff. But with the Islamophobia stuff, it kind of segued naturally into covering the broader far right. And in early 2017, well, I guess it was about June, I ended up back in my hometown, which is Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the site of the deadliest Civil War battle. And there was a rally there for all these neo-Confederates and militiamen and even some KKK guys who had been drawn to the battlefield over a fake rumor online that Antifa was going to turn up and piss on Confederate graves.
I remember this, yes.
Which, with a little bit of fact-checking, they would have realized that there are no marked Confederate graves in Gettysburg. But at any rate, I covered that. A militiaman ended up literally shooting himself in the foot during the course of that demonstration, and Antifa never showed up. But, a couple months later, that little rally, probably 100 people, felt like a bit of a preview. And a couple months later, I was in Charlottesville for Unite the Right, and I covered that. And I'm sure you guys have had people on the podcast before who were there, but I think anyone who was there kind of changed the trajectory of their lives. And when I got back from covering Unite the Right, my editor at the time, Lydia Polgreen, told me and my reporting partner, Andy Campbell, that this was our beat now. So I've been covering the far right ever since. Jesus, is that like over 6 years? Yeah. And so, a lot of the coverage, it's just kind of, I've gone to a lot of demonstrations, a lot of Trump rallies, and a lot of my coverage is kind of focused on the intersection of the far right and people in power. So exposing extremists in the military or police departments or in the GOP and so forth.
Yeah, you've written a lot on this, and it's great to have you here to explain some of it.
Yeah, you mentioned the Neo-Confederate rally and a fake rumor spreading, and my thoughts jumped to, well, I bet the Gateway Pundit picked this up. And also, that seems, was this 2016 or 2017? Because I know this is a thing that happens a lot now, where Antifa is going to show up and the far right blows up this story. Was this one of the first instances that you remember of like a fake Antifa rally occurring?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was, I'm pretty sure it was June 2017 and June or early July. I think it had something to do, corresponded with the anniversary of the battle, which is in early July. But yeah, I mean, that was like, I was still new to the beat, and that was kind of my first time brushing up against rumors of Antifa, and also just kind of grappling with what Antifa is and isn't, which has turned into a large part of my beat.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I know you've covered a lot of this stuff on the ground and actually been there. And I'm sure that your experiences probably vary a lot with the commentary you see online. I'm sure that you understand this stuff from a perspective that a lot of people don't because they're not going there. Have you seen significant changes over the years in terms of people being more extreme or more vocal and outward in their appearance? Has it been kind of a gradual thing, or has that accelerated recently?
Yeah, great question. I think like it kind of comes in waves. So like when I was, in 2017, obviously that's when the alt-right was like going mask off, and that's like the significance of Charlottesville, right? It's like all these dudes who had been hiding behind avatars and usernames for years were feeling emboldened enough by the rise of Trump that they felt that they could, invade a town without masks and, maybe terrorize a town without consequence. And then, in the months following Charlottesville, I covered a lot of other demonstrations like Richard Spencer going to the University of Florida or going to Michigan State. I covered Milo going to Berkeley.
Right.
And the fallout from those demonstrations combined with, I would argue, a lot of anti-fascist work that went into infiltrating these groups and exposing their memberships, is that, the alt-right as we knew it in Charlottesville, like largely collapsed. And at one point, Richard Spencer even conceded that Antifa was winning. And then, so like over the subsequent years, you kind of saw the development of different far-right formations. You saw the rise of the Proud Boys and groups like Patriot Prayer, which were very active, especially in the Northwest. And I ended up covering some really crazy demonstrations in Portland. And then, I think those kind of formations, Proud Boys, Patriot Prayer, various militia groups, and the emergence of the Groypers, like Nick Fuentes' Groypers, you kind of saw that coalition at January 6th.
Right.
And then the same kind of thing happened after January 6th, right? Like after Charlottesville, it's where, everyone that was involved, they felt emboldened and they were encouraged to be there. But then, afterwards, there was a lot of work to ID everybody that was there and to ensure consequences. And then, of course, what are we at now? Over 1,000 prosecutions, probably.
Yeah, right about that.
Yeah. So I think like those movements after January 6th, like largely went to ground. And we've mostly been seeing them reemerge at the local level where they are, doing their best to get elected into city councils, school boards, where they're turning up at drag story hours and what have you. A lot of the extremism that I think we're tracking right now is happening at the local level, which is, just as scary as not big national demonstrations. And I think where we're at right now is it kind of feels like everything's gearing up for next year. In a way, the far right almost feels stronger than it did like 6 years ago. And it's like there's different formations of it now. But I think what the Richard Hanania story demonstrates especially is that there are some very powerful people, not only in the GOP and in politics, but in Silicon Valley, who are heavily invested in the far right, but also are very explicit about not believing in democracy and, who even talk about advocating monarchy,
right.
And so on and so forth. These are people that are kind of, I think, shaping whatever the far right will look like next year as we head into an election.
Right. And we're talking about Richard Hanania. He's now a somewhat, and I'm making big air quotes here, respectable academic figure who has the ear of people like Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson, and he managed to get himself a book blurb from Peter Thiel. However, he, like a lot of these people, has written a whole lot of racist things using a pseudonym. And you wrote this up quite extensively. Can you walk us through this investigation? Tell us how you connected the dots on this?
Yeah, for sure. So Richard Hanania has kind of emerged as this kind of like eminent Greece or like court philosopher for like Silicon Valley libertarians.
Right.
And at the time I did this investigation, he was a visiting scholar at the University of Texas. You know, he was delivering lectures to the Yale Federalist Society. He's scheduled to give a lecture at Stanford this month. He, you know, has written for the New York Times, for the Washington Post, for the Atlantic. J.D. Vance once cited him as like an interesting thinker, like a year or two ago. He developed a really big following on Substack. He developed a really big following on Twitter. And the shit he was writing was like always pretty racist.
Right.
And libertarian, but I don't think what people appreciated was just how steeped in like extremist circles he was. And basically, you know, I had seen some murmurings online that years ago Richard Hanania had used a pseudonym to write for supremacist websites. So my investigation was just kind of a matter of tracking that rumor down and seeing if I could verify it. And we found that we were able to connect his email addresses to a series of usernames on white supremacist websites, and found out that he had been using the pseudonym Richard Host to write for the most abhorrent publications in America, including, we were talking about Richard Spencer a little bit earlier, but Richard Spencer tapped Richard Host, you know, in air quotes, to be one of the first writers for altright.com, which was like a pretty formative publication for what became the alt-right.
Right.
And then, you know, we compared a lot of stuff that Richard Hanania was saying these days about his own life to biographical information that Richard Host was revealing in like 2008 to 2014, probably. And yeah, so we were able to connect the two and reveal that Richard Hanania was not only a major voice in the alt-right and white supremacist movements, but was advocating straight up eugenics, and, you know, advocating sterilizing people beneath a lower, like a certain IQ, who he argued were most often Black. And he dabbled in every type of bigotry. He was a rank misogynist, an anti-Semite, anti-Muslim, you name it, and was more or less advocating for the creation of a white-only ethno-state. And now here he is, 10 years later, a visiting scholar at the University of Texas, writing op-eds in all of the country's biggest papers.
Wow. That just is amazing that the guy was able to fly under the radar like that until this came up, that here's this guy with this whole history of this terrible stuff that he's written, terrible positions on any number of things, and somehow he slides in as an intellectual. Just wow.
Well, this is a guy who's citing the Turner Diaries, which is about as dark and concerning, and the potential for violence there is, we know that a lot of racist white supremacists cite the Turner Diaries and manifestos. And it's not shocking to me, but also it still makes me question how we got to this point, that even after all of this is revealed, I know that Hanania has suffered some consequences. I know Barry Weiss dropped him, but he's still got these speaking engagements. I haven't seen his articles taken down at New York Times or elsewhere. He's still posting. So I don't even know if the funding has dried up. He hasn't lost much here, has he?
No, and I think that's the most telling part of the story. So, like, I think someone joked after I published the article that they've never seen the phrase "did not respond to a request for comment" more in the story. And it's basically, you know, like HarperCollins just published his book a few weeks ago, a month after my story, and I had attempted to reach out to HarperCollins multiple times, basically being like, you know, you're about to publish a book by a guy that was, you know, more or less a Nazi a few years ago. And the book, by the way, was it's called The Origins of Woke, and it's kind of this screed against wokeness. And very much in the model of like Chris Rufo or what have you. But University of Texas didn't respond to a request for comment. Stanford didn't respond to a request for comment. Wall Street Journal, Times, Washington Post, I don't believe, responded to a request for comment. Oh man, what else? Oh, Substack, where he really used to kind of catapult himself to some celebrity. Like the week before my story published, the founder, I think, of Substack had Richard Hanania on his podcast and for a very friendly conversation. And then, after my story published, Richard Hanania published a Substack acknowledging my story and admitting to having used the pseudonym on white supremacist websites and kind of like trying to do like a mea culpa and like apologize. But when you actually read his Substack, it's, to me, I wouldn't call it much of an apology. Did you guys read that?
Oh yeah.
Or see that?
Yeah. We were right on that, kind of wondering. He claims that he finds it repulsive, but he doesn't really show any signs of finding it repulsive. He hasn't really changed anything that he's been writing about. His tone, everything's about the same. So what does he mean besides like the most mealy-mouthed apology that you're likely to see on something like this?
Yeah, exactly. And also like, saying it's repulsive in the same breath as he's acknowledged, like very slyly, like acknowledging that he still believes in race science.
Wink, wink. Repulsive.
Yeah. Oh, I should mention as well that I reached out to, so I'm trying to remember all of the Silicon Valley billionaires that provided blurbs for his book or have otherwise supported him. But like, I reached out to Peter Thiel, who provided a blurb for his book, Mark Andreessen, who has been on Richard Hanania's podcast a few times, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's obviously running for president, had Richard Hanania on his podcast, and none of these people replied to my request for comment or really acknowledged the story whatsoever. I think, if anything, Mark Andreessen did some tweets like defending Hanania. So, when I was saying before that I think we're kind of entering like a new formation of the far right at the moment, I think something to really keep an eye on is kind of this Silicon Valley space where it seems like a lot of very powerful people, including Elon Musk, who we haven't talked about yet, are very invested in someone like Richard Hanania, whose politics are, I would argue, not that different from when he was using a pseudonym to write for the Occidental Observer or VDare or all of these other racist websites. And a few weeks after the story published, Richard Hanania kind of continued to gloat and brag on Twitter that he hadn't been canceled. And at one point, I think like he tweeted that I was calling HarperCollins every day trying to get his book canceled, which I wasn't.
Right.
And then Elon Musk responded to that tweet about me, saying something along the lines of interesting, we'll read your book. So yeah, it's been a pretty interesting fallout from that story.
Well, and of course, Elon replies to it, and his 150 million followers, how many ever of them are real, will of course see Hanania's post, and that boosts it, and he knows what he's doing there. But I think even just looking at the scale of this, you've got Peter Thiel, the head of Palantir, this big data company, the founder of PayPal, I believe he was a board member of Facebook. You've also Mark Andreessen, like you said, have gone on Hanania's podcast a few times. And this is a guy who's a mentor to Mark Zuckerberg. He was on the Facebook board. His VC has given tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to all of these tech companies in Silicon Valley. And of course, these people look down on you and the blue checks and all of the power and influence that your words have. And these guys are, I mean, if there's a shadowy cabal, it's like, maybe you should start in Silicon Valley, but it's just amazing that they're defending this and that he's got Hanania, as you mentioned the story, he's getting this dark money into an institute that he's running out of his house and can't even trace where that's coming from. And these guys are still publicly putting their names on defenses or quasi defenses of him. But the dark money from whatever source that it's coming from, I think it's going to keep rolling in. It seems like it is, because he's, like you said, he's posting through it. He kind of just laughed it off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the dark money part. I forgot that part, which is that he had this think tank nonprofit that was registered to his address in LA that was receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars, most of which he was using to pay himself. So he definitely has some rich benefactors. And, since the story published, Hanania has hinted at the fact that he is in talks with other people, other funders and what have you, which is, it's just so crazy. Like, I'm trying to think, like, if it just feels different than a few years ago, like in 2020, during all the uprisings and discussion about anti-racism and systemic white supremacy, I feel like companies and figures, they would act more proactively not to be associated with someone like Hanania.
Right. It mattered. It mattered a lot more. They were worried about it.
Yeah. They were worried about public image and what have you. But 3 years later, and they don't care. And I don't really know the explanation for that. I think you could maybe tie it to all of the way certain buzzwords have changed the discourse over the last few years, specifically phrases like critical race theory and wokeness, and the way like the anti-trans movement has picked up so much traction that it's made someone like Hanania all that much more palatable. But yeah, I think it's an alarming development.
Yeah, definitely. They just don't seem to feel the need to even address this stuff anymore, as we've seen. It seems like they just, post through it or donate through it or whatever we're calling it these days. And he just keeps on doing what he's doing. So yeah, I see where you're at with this being a truly terrifying place to be heading into 2024, when there's going to be a very consequential election or several about where we're really going in the future. It's going to be quite something.
I think everyone listening to this probably remembers hearing about Richard Spencer and the alt-right movement in 2016 and 2017 and being concerned by that. And why is this gaining steam? And why are these people so popular online? And why are they getting so many likes and retweets? And how big is this problem? And Hanania is really no different than Richard Spencer. He posted on his website, as you mentioned. And that just seems like so long ago. Oh, that was, it feels like that was decades ago or lifetimes ago, but it was 6 years.
Yeah.
And so much has changed. And I just look at it and wonder, was Richard Spencer's problem that he just was out taking all the flack too early? Because here's this guy who's fundamentally no different, but
who worked with Richard Spencer. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think I have some reason to believe that like Richard Hanania met with Richard Spencer at the GOP convention ahead of the 2016 election. And so they were tight, not tight, but they were, in the same circles.
Right.
And I think like what the Hanania story has kind of made me reconsider in some ways is that like, I think there was this narrative after Charlottesville, and I kind of, spoke about that narrative earlier, is that like, the alt-right, the way it was formed in Charlottesville largely collapsed in the year or two after. And I think there's a tendency to think of Charlottesville as kind of the peak of the alt-right. But I think like another way we maybe should start thinking about it is that like that was an introductory blow by the alt-right, and where it made a lot of space for people like Richard Hanania to be where they are now. So yeah, I don't know. It's definitely made me rethink a lot of things.
Definitely.
So I also wanted to touch on this before we moved on from Hanania. It's another bit that you mentioned in the article, and you talked about Hanania praising the tech right, and we've talked about some of these guys, but he specifically praised David Sacks, who is a confidant of Elon Musk, and Peter Thiel and Vivek Ramaswamy, the presidential candidate for the GOP. And Hanania specifically cited their support of transhumanism and long-termism. And we're talking about Hanania and his past and his focus on eugenics. And as you mentioned in the piece, this may not be the exact same thing, but it sure sounds real similar to some of these racial overtones and these really racist ideas that we saw with the eugenics movement.
Yeah, I think so. I think, if I'm perfectly honest, I'm not a tech reporter and I'm not all that familiar with Sachs and Andreessen and all these folks, but the story was quite an introduction to them. And, I had heard of long-termism, which essentially is kind of this techno-futurist idea that like prioritizes the health of like future generations of humans, like thousands of years from now, over people kind of living here and getting by in the here and now. And like when you peel it away, what it is it basically justifies a lot of rich guys making all the decisions. It talks about altruism and charity and the need for that. But, it kind of is a society that's dependent on the largesse of billionaires. So it's a very convenient philosophy for kind of Silicon Valley rich guys. Some people that are much more involved in this stuff are familiar with long-termism, have essentially called it like eugenics by another name.
Right.
Or eugenics on steroids. So like they basically, a lot of long-termism stuff is talking about creating like perfect humans in the future. So we should start shaping society accordingly and, maybe breeding
right.
Accordingly or what have you. And it has a lot of tie-in with like restrictions on immigration or like forced sterilizations and stuff like that. So
yeah, which of course Hanania has written in favor of based on potentially IQ tests or some other means that is meant to create the best humans. And it's really just not difficult to see how they can find common cause with this guy, and also why something like the Great Replacement Theory would sound really appealing to these same people, because it's basically the same thing.
Yeah. This is a hop, skip, and a jump, if even that, from race science and eugenics, whether they're saying it in those terms or not. And it all ties together very, very neatly when you look at it. It's clear that this is just a nicer way to say it rather than, some new thing.
Yeah, it's like it's putting lipstick on it. And I meant to emphasize earlier that like when Richard Hanania was writing under his pseudonym for white supremacist websites, he was the guy that wrote about eugenics. He was like the voice of that topic. He maintained his own blog called Human Biodiversity, Human Biodiversity is just a preferred euphemism for race science and for eugenics. And so the dude that was like advocating forcibly sterilizing Black people and other non-white people is, now has the ears of all these long-termists.
Yeah. Even past 2024, however that comes out, we're still looking at some pretty negative stuff coming out here down the road. And these people have enough money to keep this going for quite some time and to push this agenda for, as long as they want to. So definitely something to keep an eye on going forwards. So you wrote a little about Tucker Carlson as well, former Fox News star turned white nationalist Twitter streamer, and all the conspiracy theories that he brought into American living rooms and how this is going to outlast his legacy. Were you as surprised as we were that Fox decided to let him go?
Yeah. I thought he was going to be there for forever. I guess it got eventually just became so untenable that they couldn't keep him there. But to be honest, like I haven't kept that much up with him since he left. Have you guys like watched his live stream?
Watched a couple of them. I watched the one with Ice Cube. That was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And
I've read the synopsis from Eyes on the Right. And he's watched every single one of them and thankfully has picked out the highlights for us. But yeah, it's some of the recent.
Yes, he is. Poor guy.
Guy. Yes. Yeah, he had Bill O'Reilly on recently, which, he still exists. But you've got the Tate brothers. I mean, there's so many white men that have been accused of rape or sexual assault, and Tucker's, come on down.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, it does occur to me too, like, I mean, obviously, like, Tucker is still going to be a very prominent figure and, you know, probably one day will run for office. And I'm sorry to speak that into existence right now, but it does occur to me, like, there's a lot of conversations all the times about, like, deplatforming and does it work or not. And, like, to a certain degree, like, I feel like the Carlson story and, like, him not having his nightly primetime slot, like, he's just not as much in the discourse as he was. Do you guys agree with that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think personally that when you can take somebody like a Tucker Carlson, somebody with that size platform, off of the vast majority of TVs that are going to be watching him, that's a good thing. Unequivocally, that's a good thing, because number one, his fan base is going to have a much harder time finding him wherever he ends up. Number two, whatever they replace him with is not going to be as loved, and it's going to take a while for that to get traction, especially when you're doing it in a really rushed manner like they did, because it's not like they had some plan to hand that off. It seemed like he just got fired over the weekend. They tried a couple of replacement hosts and then they end up going with Jesse Waters, and it's just like not this thing that is really catching on. Fox lost almost half their viewership, it seemed like, for a while over this. So,
well, and I think part of the way that Tucker got mainstreamed is that people are just watching him by default. I'm in Tennessee, and a lot of people here just leave Fox News on all day. And if it's on Fox, a lot of right-leaning people are just going to watch it and think this is normal. This is the normal discourse. This is politics. This is the discussion we have to have. And Tucker appeared that way. He appeared to just be another Fox host, but here are these neo-Nazi talking points that are getting filtered into the discussion every night. And he's got some staffers, multiple staffers got outed for their ties to white supremacists or far-right figures and websites. So yeah, I think taking that away is a good thing. But also, for whatever reason, Tucker is so desperate to not be forgotten and to be part of the conversation that now he's just like willing to talk to anyone about anything if it keeps eyeballs on him.
Yeah. It's like Alex Jones, basically. And like, he has a relationship with Alex Jones, too. We all know now. And also, I should have mentioned earlier that Richard Hanania appeared on Tucker Carlson like twice. And I wouldn't be surprised if they are in touch. I know, like, have you guys talked about Darren Beatty on here before?
Oh, yes. Darren Beatty's aware of us. He's a fan. He loves our show.
Okay.
Darren Beatty is just a big fan of this podcast.
Okay. Well, and so we know that that Tucker is a fan of Darren Beatty. It seems like Darren Beatty and Richard Hanania are pretty tight. So in a way, it's like a small circle of people that are kind of working together at the moment.
And it seems also that, you're speaking of Alex Jones, guys will stay, anything to stay relevant. Saw he did a call out a couple days ago of Nick Fuentes saying he wanted to have him on and yell at him, tell him how wrong he is about all of this stuff. And Fuentes on October 22nd responds on his own Telegram channel that he'll be debating Alex Jones about the Gaza war in studio this week. So,
Jesus Christ, dude.
Yeah.
We have that to look forward to.
Oh, God. Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's so terrible. It's going to get, it's just going to keep getting.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like it's been bad for a while, but I feel like it's going to keep getting worse especially with everything that's happening in Gaza right now. And as we head into the election next year, it's just going to.
Oh, yeah.
There is not a more difficult topic, and there's not one with more emotion attached to it than Israel and Palestine. And this flare up and war in Gaza is exactly what we did not need. And it's just supercharged some of the worst instincts of people, especially on Twitter.
It's terrible right now.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of, people that you guys obviously discussed on the show and that we've been talking about today see an opportunity in discourses like this to find new followers and fans. So, and especially with how much Twitter is degraded right now to the point where it's hard to tell what's real and what's not. Like, I feel like there's been some moments already in the news cycle showing how bad Twitter is as a news platform, but holy shit, man, during the last couple of weeks, during the Gaza stuff, it's just been unusable.
Yeah.
Terrible. And it's just, you see so many people, smart people even like sharing and retweeting stuff that is wrong.
Right. And we've seen professional fact checkers like Cheyenne over at BBC Verify, people just throwing up their hands and being like, we can't keep up with this. There is just this absolute torrent of bullshit right now. We've got video after video from 2012 in Syria that's come out and being passed off as current footage from Palestine. It's just... You never really knew how good you had it until it's gone kind of thing. Like, I mean, we all called Twitter a hell site, and it was, but I didn't appreciate what guardrails it actually had until now. Yeah, the whole levels of hell thing was sadly misunderstood because we were on like maybe 1 or 2, and now we're dropping real fast here.
No, it's true. And it just seems like on the right, particularly the racism got dialed up to 10 again, but it's like all that latent Islamophobia and hatred of Muslims that they hadn't really been that concerned with for a while. They've been much more focused on trans people and LGBTQ rights. And now all those same people have suddenly pivoted to, oh yeah, remember how much you are supposed to hate Muslims? And it's not great seeing that come back.
No.
Like I said earlier, like I kind of got started covering the far right by covering Islamophobia. And it's been interesting over the years, like some of the major figures in like the anti-Muslim scene, like people like Robert Spencer, not to be confused with Richard Spencer, Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, Frank Gaffney, all those folks have been, largely irrelevant for years, but I kind of started seeing them creep up on my timeline again in the past couple of weeks. And just kind of goes to show that the far right, but the right more generally too, is always finding an opportunity to exploit the latest scapegoat, basically.
Right. So you mentioned that you're working on a book and the title is To Catch a Fascist. Can you talk a little bit about that? Where are we going with this?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for asking. Yeah, so I'm on book leave right now, and basically the book is called To Catch a Fascist, and it's basically a book about Antifa and about anti-fascist researchers. Over the last 7 or so years, there's been groups of anti-fascists that have either infiltrated far-right groups online or IRL in person, or have otherwise done research to expose the members of multiple groups. And so, for example, I'm working with a spreadsheet right now of some 1,200 people that have been exposed over the last 5 or 7 years by anti-fascists. And so the idea for the book is to explore some of these stories. So like what happens when a town finds out that their local police officer or pastor or city councilman is posting Nazi memes on Telegram, and like how communities respond or don't respond.
Right.
But I'm also hoping that the book can get into what Antifa is and isn't, and talk about how the right kind of manufactured this Antifa boogeyman over the last years. Because, prior to 2017, Antifa wasn't a household name. And now I would argue that it is. And actually in 2017, I believe Merriam-Webster named it as one of its words of the year. You know, and we've had some kind of Antifa panics over the last years where the GOP was obsessed with it. And a lot of its messaging was about Antifa. If you were at CPAC, everyone was talking about Antifa. Trump was, wanted to declare it a terrorist organization. In 2020, you had all these viral rumors about Antifa. Like,
oh, yes.
Do you guys remember the one? It was like busloads of Antifa were going to come to this town in northern Idaho and take it over.
Well, and that's the funny part, is that was everywhere. It wasn't just one town in northern Idaho. It was like practically every town, every section of... I'm from Washington State. I live in the west side, Seattle area. And
nice.
Yeah,
sure.
There were every small town out on the Olympic Peninsula, every small town like out towards the like Port Angeles and, Forks, areas like that. There were supposedly flyers that were circulating that people were taking very seriously, that there was going to be an Antifa takeover. It was everywhere. It was like basically the same flyer copy pasted from, I think it started at least in some gun forum, maybe the AR15.com forums, that seems to have made its way to practically everybody. So
yeah,
what's fascinating to me about this whole thing is that in 2017, there was a petition that was submitted to the White House for Donald Trump to declare Antifa a terrorist organization. And the guy that wrote that petition is a guy who just recently testified against Douglas Mackey in his election interference trial. He goes by the name of Microchip. Same guy.
Yeah, of course. I forgot that was fucking Microchip. I'm so glad you reminded me of that.
It was fucking Microchip. And his quote to Politico about this was, "It was to bring our broken right side together after Charlottesville and prop up Antifa as a punching bag." And what else needs to be said, really?
Dude, see, I'm so glad we're talking, because I need that for the book.
Glad we could help.
But he really spelled it out there, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
And that guy always has essentially spelled it out. He's still spelling it out under his current alt, and he's spelling it out, what he plans on doing about all of this stuff. And it's amazing to watch the somewhat less than credulous media keep taking the bait and saying, oh, well, maybe there's actually something to this.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. It reminds me of like Chris Rufo, like spelling out explicitly that like critical race theory and other terms are just like he's very explicit about why he's using those terms. It's to unify the right and have like a punching bag, like Microchip said about Antifa.
And it's very effective, and it puts a name on things that people couldn't explain before, and they don't even necessarily have to know what it means.
Nope.
But it's just a thing they all agree they're going to say now, and that's CRT, that's Antifa.
Yeah, exactly.
Quote, "So the narrative changed from I hate myself because we have neo-Nazis on our side to I really hate Antifa, let's get along and tackle the terrorists," he explained. I mean...
That's a Microchip quote?
Yeah, it's a Microchip quote. I'll send you the article.
Yeah. God, I mean, it was fucking effective. It really worked, I think. Yeah, I mean, and it's also, I think, when you look back at it now, the people that the right was calling Antifa, like, their definition of Antifa just basically became all-encompassing. I'm certainly Antifa to them. I'm sure you guys would be considered Antifa too.
Oh, absolutely we are.
But they would call like Democratic lawmakers Antifa, which like if you actually talk to like a militant anti-fascist, that is just so like, counter to everything that they believe in and to what Antifa actually is.
Well, they're kind of telling on themselves when they say that these people are Antifa, because like one working definition is anybody who is anti-fascist. And if you're accusing all these people who work against you of being Antifa, then what are you?
Yeah, exactly. It's not very reflective on their part.
No, it gets into the absurd when I see them call Bill Kristol or, somebody, a rhino is Antifa. And it's so divorced from reality. But hey, they make their own reality.
Yeah, exactly. And for the part of the book when I get into the kind of panic of like the panic or the boogeyman about Antifa, I have two books that I'm going to read. One is by Jack Posobiec and the other is by Andy No, which are their opuses about Antifa. So I'll come back and let you guys know how those books are.
Yeah, definitely. So how do you stay sane? How do you stay sane and grounded while working on this stuff? We're always looking for suggestions.
Yeah. If you guys figure it out, let me know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's funny. Like, I think I've been doing this for a while now, so it just kind of feels like just a part of my life at this point. But I think, a big part of it is talking to folks like you and other people that keep other people in kind of the right watching community. And
Right.
especially, a lot of collaboration with other reporters on the beat who you can talk to about this stuff and who are fluent in these worlds and will make you feel a little less crazy. And then, part of it too is doing the work and sometimes seeing impact. And then finally, I really enjoy alcohol.
Sometimes you need it.
I'm also I'm in like the throes of book writing right now, so I'm chain smoking again, which I'll have to quit at some point. But
oh man, well, stay safe and stay sane. Yeah, you're disconnecting a little bit, but also diving deeper into certain aspects, which it's kind of good and bad,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. It's I will say it's good to be off the timeline as much and kind of focusing on specific stories, but I'll be back on the timeline in January or so.
So how do people support you and your work? Buy the book when it comes out. Definitely. This sounds like it's going to be a banger.
Thanks. So you can follow me on Twitter or X, whatever it's called, as long as it's still around. I'm at Let's Go Matthias. I'm also on Blue Sky now, which seems to be a much nicer place. Also at Let's Go Matthias. Otherwise, you can see my byline again at HuffPost when I'm back in January. But yeah, whenever I write this book and get it out there, which seems like it's going to be a lot of work, but whenever it's available for pre-order, I would love for you guys to pre-order it and to come back on this show and promote it.
No problem. We'll definitely have you back.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let's plan on it.
Cool. All right, sweet.
All right, well,
thanks so much for having me, guys.
Thank you, Chris. We really appreciate your time today. You have a great rest of your day. Good luck with the writing, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thanks, guys. You too.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Did Nothing Wrong podcast. If you want to hear more, you can find us on the web at didnothingwrongpod.com. Please make sure you subscribe to get our content straight into your inbox. You can also follow us on Twitter at James, the word 4, and the letter M, all one word, and Grizza BJJ, GRZA BJJ, as well as DNW Pod. We're extremely grateful for paid subscriptions and donations that allow us to keep doing this important work. Thanks, and remember, everyone mentioned did nothing wrong.